Serve your logic, I am the man. It was all good, don't you see? Until the day logic hit me.
Converted man here.
But Saul, when in Acts 9:22 said this, Saul increased all the more in strength and confounded the Jews who dwelt in Damascus, proving that this Jesus is the Christ. He did that with the messianic prophecies, is what we think by what the context allows. 300 clear prophecies about Jesus were foretold before he came, and he fulfilled them all.
You have to make a lot of assumptions in order to make that stipulation. You have to assume that the gospel narrative is actual historical history about somebody recorded accurately, rather than some story that might have gotten embellished or changed over time. And so there's a very good reason to not think that the Gospels are portraying the actual Jesus, if there is even an actual Jesus to base anything off of in the first place. One reason to be suspect of that is that historians before, during, and after the time of Jesus are completely silent on the topic of Jesus, Christianity, and all of that until, I think, 20 years, 10 years, maybe might be the closest you get. But it's not, some time passes before that they start talking, before anybody mentions Christianity, let alone Jesus. And then, of course, we have the problem of known forgeries of those writings that happened. So some Christian or Catholic or whatever they might have been went in and grabbed the Josephus text and wrote in stuff to try to make it seem like Jesus was doing more than he did. Well, why would they lie about something that's true? Well, maybe they felt like they needed to fabricate additional historical evidence because there's nothing else. In Tacitus, there's also questions about the authenticity of some of what he says in regards to Jesus. But at the very least, he mentions Christians, which isn't very surprising. Okay, so the Christians, 20 some odd years after Jesus supposedly did all these things, are known and talked about, and their beliefs are well known or talked about, or at least known well enough for somebody to write about them. But that doesn't say that anything that they believe actually happened. They just comment on that these people believe these things. So it's not really that impressive as far as any sort of secondary accounts to what supposedly happened. So if we're to accept that Jesus did and said everything that he does and says in the gospel narratives, then there's a lot of problems that come with that, historically speaking. We have to figure out why nobody commented on the darkening of the sky or the ground shaking. Those events are said to have happened during Jesus' crucifixion, as well as the temple shroud being torn asunder. That would have been noticed by at least one Jewish person, if not more, and they would have recorded it as some sort of miracle or something. How would they have made the tie in to know that this was about Jesus if they were just there in their temple chilling out? Because somebody had to have seen the shard tear in order to tell that story so that it got written, right? So somebody saw that supposedly happen and wrote it then, or told somebody, and then that person told somebody that eventually wrote it down, because the earliest copies that we have of anything written are also way later in the time scale of when this happened. It wasn't written down immediately as it was happening. So there's another problem with that, another reason we should be suspect of this. Jesus was bigger than the Beatles. He had huge crowds following him around. You know, you have a story of, people climbing on the house and, tearing off the roof to lower the guy down so that Jesus can help him. And then you have, of course, one of the Gospels talking about the dead coming out of their graves and walking around for a while. Nobody Nobody noticed that? Nobody wrote it down? No Roman official was like, this is kind of weird. I need to make a note of this. Just silence. So it must be a vast conspiracy that none of these people wrote anything down because they somehow knew at the time that it would have talked about Jesus and they didn't want to admit that or something. You have to come up with another explanation for why nobody wrote these events as they happened. But only later did anybody write anything down. And what they're writing is not based on eyewitness testimony. Now, of course, apologists want you to believe that. No, this is based on the hearsay of somebody else that heard it from somewhere else, that heard it from somewhere else, that heard it from somewhere else. And we don't know how far back that chain goes. But to think that no embellishment would happen, that's a real big stretch to make. And there's additional reasons to doubt that Jesus actually fulfilled any of these prophecies, and I'm going to go with the Jewish people themselves as a good reason to doubt that he fulfilled any prophecies, let alone these things that you're calling prophecies. You see, the Jewish people have a certain idea of what the Savior, the Messiah, would be. And so they will tell you, if you ask, and there's plenty of resources for this, I can provide a few, that say, here's what the Messiah will do. These are prophecies from our view. And Jesus, even if he existed, didn't do a single one of them. So that's a problem.
His birth, his life, his death, what he would do, and his resurrection. All these things were predicted before he came. No other spiritual leader had this type of predictive material. Over 300 of them all came true in one guy. That's massive proof. No one else has ever done it. The odds of those happening by chance are mathematically impossible.
Well, I'm not going to get into the probability issue because there's nothing even to examine. We don't have any proof that any prophecy was fulfilled or that those things were even seen as prophecy at the time. Now, there's another question that has to be pondered about prophecy. So if I say that something's going to happen or eventually will happen, how do you know to write that down in hopes that it will happen? How do you know that I'm a confirmed prophet before it actually happens? How many things do I have to get right before the thing that I'm saying is seen as a prophecy? That's a problem. The other problem is it has to be something clear and not unambiguous. Something that has a firm date. That can't be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It can't be some fluke accident. Can't be, by the way, they'll name the Savior this. Well, somebody wants to name their kid that. There's nothing to stop them from doing that if they know that was a prophecy, right? It's a pretty popular name. So yeah. How many people are named Muhammad? A lot. Well, okay, because it's a popular name. A lot of people are named Jesus or Jesus in Mexico, and it's a popular name, right? So that's another problem. And these things are vague. They're bizarre. And again, they only are fulfilled if we could actually show that the people that were writing about this supposed character doing these supposed actions knew nothing about the Old Testament at all, knew nothing about the Torah at all, because if they knew about that, then they might include, oh yeah, and then he rode 2 donkeys sideways so that he fulfilled this thing that's a prophecy, which isn't even a prophecy, but yeah, he totally did that. So the number doesn't matter because we haven't established that it's a fact, historically speaking or logically speaking.
Equally, we see the evidence through all the things that we can see, touch, and think about. What do I mean? No one has blind faith enough to believe that order came from disorder, that uniformity came from the accidental, that intelligence came from non-intelligence, that design came from chaos, that personality came from non-personality, that love came from hard matter, and that everything came from nothing. No one has enough blind faith to believe that.
You might be right that nobody has blind faith in those things. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody does. But what's interesting is we don't need faith for some of those things because we actually have scientific understanding for some of those phenomenon that you are throwing out there willy-nilly. Now look, even if it was the case that we couldn't explain these things, or we didn't understand them fully, or we didn't understand their origin, just saying that we don't believe in your ideas doesn't make the opposite position the case. So if you say, well, either there's order or chaos, and I say, I don't believe that, that doesn't mean that I believe something else entirely. It just means I don't believe your assertion. You say, well, it's one or the other. How do you know? It's a false dichotomy, potentially. So if you're saying that the choice is between chaos leading into order, which it does until after a while, then order becomes chaos again. It's just how things kind of work. But, you know, science. You know, we're not going to bother doing science. I mean, you know, that's gonna screw us up for the argument here. So we're just going to have to ignore that and assert instead that your belief is fill in the blank, and nobody has that belief, even though I'm asserting that nobody has that belief, which I haven't proven, and I'm asserting that you believe that, and I'm assuming and asserting that that's what you would have to believe if you don't believe what I believe, which is that it came out of, you know, this particular God concept. And none of that, even if it was true, would make a positive case for your side. What if somebody did believe all that? Then what? It's unconvincing to them. See, what you need is facts and evidence, not just assertions and logical fallacies. But so far you have proven nothing, but you have made a lot of assertions.
They try to say they do, but I like how Bonson said it. He said, Paul says that all men know God and suppress the truth.
Oh, so we're dealing with presuppositionalism. So there's no point in trying to be rational at this point. Well, I don't care what Paul said, because Laud said that Paul's lying. And if you don't know who Laud is, then you haven't read The Lobsterist. And if you haven't read that, then you're wrong, automatically, because you can only understand what's right by reading that, and you haven't done that, because if you had, then you would know that Paul's a liar. Okay, it doesn't say that specifically in there, but you have to read between the lines and understand it through my interpretation of it.
It is just because unbelievers are dependent upon God and the existence of God is so obvious that they are made fools when they try to suppress it.
Man, it's really weird to hear basically a pastor, which is what I'm guessing this guy is, maybe he's just an apologist, quote the Bible and not tell us where in the Bible that this is said. As such, I can't tell you that you're wrong based on theology. So instead, I guess I just have to say a circular argument.
C.S. Lewis said this, the atheist can't find God for the same reason that a thief can't find a policeman.
What? That joke doesn't even make sense. I don't even think it is a joke. Okay, so the thief can't find the policeman. So, like what? During the time that they're being a thief, they wouldn't want to find a policeman because then they'd be interrupted during their thievery and, you know, hauled off to jail or court or whatever. But you mean like after they're done being a thief? Like, you know, they robbed a house, but now they're in trouble and they need to find a policeman. Like, they can't find one now because they're a thief? Are they a thief for all time, or just when they committed that crime they're a thief, and they're still a thief for a while, like, technically speaking, because they robbed somebody, they're a thief? But, like, at what point do they no longer become a thief? Like after they pay the penalty for being a thief, then they're not a thief? Their name is cleared? Like, okay, they gave back the items, so it's like, look, you were a thief, now you're not a thief, don't do that again, or you will be a thief, and stop doing that. But then, like, you could still find a policeman during that. So what does this mean? I don't understand.
So when Romans 1 says that atheists know that God exists, but they suppress the truth and unrighteousness, what do you mean? Some of these guys sound really hardcore in their atheism. Well, it's like this. If you had a little kid, let's say your neighbor has a little kid named Johnny, and Johnny is a really bad kid. He's always getting in trouble, but the mother doesn't believe that Johnny is a bad kid. she tells everybody, no, everybody's out to get Johnny. He's a great kid. Everybody's jealous of him. That's why they're out to get him. So he goes to school. He gets in trouble by the teacher, and the mother says, oh, no, Johnny would never do that. Goes to the principal's office the next day for something else. The principal calls her, no, Johnny would never do that. Goes to a friend's house to spend the night because he gets rewarded for his bad behavior. He goes there, spends the night, steals money from the mother's purse of his friend, and then the mother calls Johnny's mother and tells her and says, no, Johnny would never do that. You must be wrong. You're out to get him. But what happens, though, when Johnny comes back and stays the night at her house again, she hides a purse and locks the liquor cabinet because she knows in her heart of hearts that little Johnny is a bad child. And atheists know in their heart of hearts, they know that God exists. It's kind of like the person who says, well, I don't hate women. You know, I love all women. But every time a lady sits next to him on a bus, he gets up and moves. Every time he hears a woman on the radio, he changes the channel. Every time he sees a woman newscaster, he has to change the channel. Anytime someone brings up the subject of women, he has to change the subject. He says he doesn't hate women, but everything he does and how he lives demonstrates that he actually does. He could protest all he wants, but everybody knows that he hates women, and everybody knows, or they should know, that all people know that God exists, no matter how convincing they are.
Okay, so I'm a bit torn on how to approach this. Do I point out how bad these analogies are? Or do I point out the circular reasoning or the presuppositional apologetics being employed here? Or do I go the route of the theological route, which is kind of hard because he's not telling me where in the Bible he's getting this idea from? So, which way do I go? Let's see. I've got the theology. I could tell him he's wrong on that. He won't care. I could tell him he's wrong about the logic. Pretty sure he won't care about that. Presumption thing, I already mentioned he's a precept. So how do I go about this? Yeah, I don't know. The analogies suck. I guess I'll go with that then. Yeah. No, that mom is a bad mom. And as far as her doing something that is counterintuitive to what she believes, people do that, sure. But the analogy to Johnny is not that Johnny is invisible, undetectable by scientific method, unprovable by logical arguments, and known only to the mother and nobody else except through a book. So, we're not talking about the same thing here. I can prove that Johnny exists, if he does exist, but he doesn't because you made him up in order to make this broken analogy. But Johnny's not God. Or, wait, is Johnny supposed to be the atheist? Or, no, the mom's supposed to be the atheist, right? And she's treating Johnny being good as not believing in God. Or she doesn't believe that Johnny's bad, even though there's evidence that Johnny's bad, so therefore she's the atheist, I guess. But there's no evidence that there is a God, as far as the evidence that you gave for Johnny being bad. We have nothing like that for your God even existing, let alone... Wait, does that mean God is constantly doing bad things, and we're the ones ignoring God? Well, that would have to be. The only way the analogy works is that way. So there is a God, but it's just a really bad, rotten God. That would actually make a lot of sense. Okay, I could go with that. Sure, okay, your God is a horrible, rotten kid named Johnny that I just don't want to admit is bad. But I never said he was good. So then, how does... Wait, okay, hold on. I'm going to go back. Maybe complaining about the analogy was the wrong way to go after all.
It's also difficult, in fact, impossible to defend atheism. That's why a lot of the newer atheists are backtracking from that and saying, well, we're not really making any claim.
Is there any proof that atheists have changed the way that they conduct atheism? Or is that just an assertion that you're making? It's not as if you have any citations or any proof that shows that atheists were doing things one way and then changed to do things a different way, do you? I don't think you do. But when it comes to Yahweh, that God, oh yeah, that God doesn't exist. Other gods, maybe, I don't know. It depends on the claim. I haven't, heard every claim regarding every sort of type of God there is. But for Yahweh, oh yeah, it's a hard no on that one. And that I can argue against. As far as proving it's not, that's not a thing that you can do with anything, because that's not how things function in logic. But, again, I'm trying to explain this to a presuppositionalist, and the word logic has no meaning in presuppositionalism, so forget about that, So at this point, I'm not talking to him. I guess I'm just talking. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. On with the video. How many long have we gone? 20 minutes? Nobody's going to watch this video.
Fine, that's good. We are, they aren't, we are. Okay, logically there cannot be any true atheists. For one to propose that God does not exist anywhere at any time, one would have to know all things and be omnipresent, eternal, and infinite, and of course that would make you God.
Ah, yes, the age-old classic, you have to be God to know that there's no God argument that fails on every conceivable level that an argument could fail. Logically speaking, scientifically speaking, philosophically speaking, in every single possible way that an argument could fail, this one does, because it means that the only way to know God would be to be God. And the only way to know that there isn't a God is also to be God. And at that point, you know that you exist. So you also, I would presume, know that you're God. And then you would never think that there wasn't a God in the first place, because you'd have all the evidence that you exist that you need. But to suggest that we have to look everywhere and at all times at the same time is still bound, I would presume, to our universe, because, well, God supposedly is outside space and time, at least for many God posits, and I think that his God posit would land outside space-time. And so you wouldn't find it inside this universe. You'd have to look outside, whatever the bleep that means as well. But even if you looked there and you didn't physically see anything, the theist said, see, it's not with your eyes. You can't see God with your eyeballs. You have to see him with your soul or spirit or something else, because God's not physical. So you couldn't find God by looking anyways in the way that we look for anything else, because it's in its own special category that requires you to do it in a special way that's a non-physical way, whatever that means. I guess that means a spiritual way, which I'm not convinced there's a spirit, so I can't go that route. I have to go the route that I go with for everything, which is empirical evidence. That would be seeing God directly with my own eyeballs, or at the very least seeing some thing that is God with a machine of some sort, something that detected God. But we don't have that sort of evidence. There's no repeatable test or any science that we can perform on God. Nothing. Everything that we've done to try to test supernatural claims has utterly failed to produce any sort of significant results that we wouldn't expect to find from chance alone. Prayer studies have epically failed every time. We've never seen God move a mountain or somebody with enough faith do that. We haven't seen humans do the impossible, like float up in the air or regrow limbs or whatever. We don't see that. We see everything that we do see or is explainable by mundane phenomenon. To summarize, we don't have empirical evidence or repeatable test or a valid and sound argument. And unless and until we do, we must be skeptical of your conclusions. Also, there's more of his video, but it's more of the same. So if you really want me to cover that, I guess I can, but it'll be like another 20-minute video. So I don't know if you want that, but let me know.